in probabilistic risk assessment, what the industry does is it looks at how many cancers might be caused and how many illnesses and how many problems caused in loss of life from operating radioactive atomic plants. As they operate, they release radioactivity. And that's considered a cost of business, that it's good for the public welfare to have adequate electricity and allegedly cheap electricity, which it isn't. And for that, certain people may become ill and may die for the better public good. And it's just not viable numbers. It's not actual numbers. It's based on sort of as if I was playing a poker hand. You get dealt certain cards and you don't know what they are. And the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, doesn't know. It's like playing dice. What numbers come up? There is no accurate way of measuring it. Now, some of the industry that I said this will criticize that finding, but we looked. Every atomic reactor, as it's operating, gives off radioactivity. And different times in the cycle of the plant, it gives off more or less. In the UK, Dr. Ian Farley has done a study of operating reactors in the European Union and what happens during their life cycle. And there are spikes in amount of radiation that's released and spikes in cancers from those radiation releases that occur whenever a reactor is refueled. Whenever the reactor is opened, the fuel is pulled out, which in Europe and parts of the world, it is every year. In the US, it is about every 18 months that the reactor is shut down, it's opened up, and the fuel is changed to rebalance so you have an ongoing, you can create an ongoing atomic chain reaction inside the reactor to produce the energy to boil the water to make the electricity. Both Fairwind's Energy Education and Fairwind's Associates has been attacked. Arnie was a nuclear whistleblower in 1990, and his safety violations were reviewed by the Inspector General of the United States and in special hearings with Senator John Glenn, and proven that everything he said was true. That was even substantiated by then chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Ivan Selin, who said Arnie performed quite a service. And yet the industry has gone after us again and again and again. So when we've produced testimonies, and I've lost count, somewhere between 80 and 110 reports, and it may be more. Many of our reports haven't even been published. Some are published, some are not. It depends whether a client is asking for a report so they know what they need to look into, or they're presenting to see if they can get funding to then fight that particular issue in front of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So we've done numerous reports. And constantly, when Fairewinds testifies to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to public service boards, public service commissions, to state legislatures, to citizens' councils, the industry lawyers try and say that Arnie was a disgruntled whistleblower and he is lying. One of the best cases of that was here in California, Southern California. On the San Onofre nuclear plants, we were asked and retained by Friends of the Earth to look at data on the failing steam generators. We looked at that data and uncovered in our research that Southern California Edison had made a decision to change the steam generators without the statutory authority to do so. By the regulations, the Code of Federal Regulations, by the Code of Federal Regulations, the statutory authority is given to the NRC that states that the law, this is the federal law, that they must, if they make a change in these plants that's different from the original design, it must be brought to public hearing. In Southern California, where 8.5 million people live near these plants, they didn't want to put that up for public hearing. So they just went ahead and made these changes without review of the design, without review of the technology that they were using, which was new. They were using new metals, and they hadn't recalculated the load on any of the changes they made. So these steam generators failed after only 2 years, and they were leaking radiation into the environment. Where, right on, I think it's called U.S. Route 5 in California, and 8.5 million people live there. That's a big commuting corridor, and they were leaking radiation. So we found all these problems when Friends of the Earth asked us to review. We did a whole report. Friends of the Earth released it, and immediately Southern California Edison pushed back on us. Their woman public relations rep, who had a role like I had when I was in the industry, Jennifer Manfrey, got up there. She was on public television saying how Arnie was a liar. He was an old engineer, and they had 2,000 engineers who had verified all this data, and they just attacked us again and again and again. And about a week into the attacks, and they were on every radio station, in the paper, a whistleblower contacted us. And we have a lot of whistleblowers who contact us, and I talk to them as a paralegal because I can give them that attorney-client privilege. And he started telling me all this stuff. And finally, after 2 weeks, I said, look, I can't spend any more time on this. Either you have documents to give me, or, I have to discontinue this. I don't have time to talk about these specifics. And he sent me a whole stack of documents that he had that substantiated everything Arnie had brought forward. And then a second whistleblower came forward like 2 months later and came to Friends of the Earth. And then a third whistleblower came forward and brought documents to Senator Boxer, California's senator. And without these whistleblowers telling the truth, we would have been hung out to dry as incompetent or as liars, because the industry had millions of dollars to spend on their TV ads and their PR. We even uncovered a letter that was sent out and sent to us that said, if you work for Southern California Edison, don't talk to Fairewinds. You are forbidden to talk to Fairewinds, because they didn't want us to have any more of the data. As many people know, the San Onofre nuclear plants were closed down because they had steam generators that were leaking and leaking radiation. Now they need to be dismantled and decommissioned. During that process, the site has 2 major issues. First, there is no federal waste repository to move the waste to. Secondly, it's a very small, narrow site. It's only 55 acres. So for them to dismantle the plant and take it all apart, they want to store the radioactive fuel inside from the core that they have to pull out and put in these dry casks for storage. They want to store them in as small of an area as possible, so they want to stand these casks upright. They want to use the smallest amount of steel on these casks, and they want to stand them upright where the salt water can come against the stainless steel. Everyone who's ever been out to sea knows that that's going to cause a corrosive reaction with the stainless steel. Stainless steel and salt just don't go together. So our opinion is, Fairwind's and that of other scientists that we work with, the casks should be moved on the other side of the highway where there already is land owned by San Onofre that is already radioactively contaminated. And they should put the casks there in hardened on-site storage similar to the system used in Europe, which will protect the dry casks from any earthquake action, any seismic action, and make it much more stable. It's really hard for the public to get the facts in nuclear power. In the United States, utilities were one of the strongest industries, and people loved utilities who have built these nuclear plants because they brought electricity to their homes, they brought heat to their homes. Telephone was first a utility, so they looked at utilities as an important integral part of their community life and the growth of our economy. The atomic power industry has reshaped the utility industry, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has been an enabler. Enable them to do things that are outside of the federal statute. I'm a paralegal as well as having been a public relations person for the nuclear industry. And as a paralegal, I look at what does federal law say needs to be done. The nuclear industry asks for waivers all the time, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission grants those waivers consistently. There is a huge circle between who works for the nuclear industry at utilities and who then works on the commission and for the NRC. It's all the same people who are recycled. I'll meet somebody who's an inspector somewhere who worked for a utility, who at one time worked for another industry. We've seen it over and over again. And the schools that teach the nuclear operators have a curriculum that's been developed by the nuclear industry, so they're not even really trained as engineers or operators who know how to think outside of a specific box. In one of the cases I did as a paralegal on a nuclear case in the state of Florida, as I looked at the expert reports that were given in by the industry, I noticed that one particular expert had a lot of inconsistencies in his report. And it shouldn't be. He was the head of a nuclear engineering department at a major university in this country. And his report should have been smooth and concise. So I notified the lawyer who was going to be doing the depositions, and I said, here are my questions. Here's what comes out of here. And I wrote all the questions for the deposition. And when the lawyer went out and started asking them, he said, I thought probably a grad student had written the report, and it wasn't really written by this man who was attesting that it was his work. It was worse than that. Under oath, he said, I wrote the report, but I never did the mathematical modeling. I never did the calculations. I never ran the computer codes. I just took what the client at the nuclear power plant gave me and said was the data, and I wrote about that data. Not only is that unethical, it's illegal, and he should have had criminal charges.
Wow.
And this happens in case after case after case around this country. We look at data that's fraudulent. We look at data that can't even be read. It's so inconsistent and so out of sorts. In another case, we were sent a whole lot of documents after requesting them in a legal case. When two parties are in opposition, you have to give over the documents that have been requested or pertain to the case. So specific documents from a logbook in the operating reactor were asked for. So we got them only 10 days before the hearings, and they were all shuffled. And so we took those. I had another colleague who wasn't working at the time. She was working freelance, and she did every bit of it. Every page, put the logbook back together. And do you know what? All the specific dates that we had seen anomalies for in the nuclear power plant's operations, and we wanted to see the logbook from the reactor, all those dates were missing. And the judge never made them give it to us.
Why?
Why? Because money and power. The industry has a lot of friends in high places. People who invest in utilities believe these guys are telling the truth because, as I said earlier, the utilities are a backbone of our social fabric in this country and our economic fabric. And so people my age and older who are retirees have invested in and bought utility stocks and had them for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And they can't believe that this company that they've invested in their whole lifetime as a stockholder might be also creating atomic mishaps, creating problems, not investing in appropriate safety devices. When I reflect on how people react to what we're saying, it's really an interesting dynamic. Different parts of the country and different parts of the world react differently. The East Coast has more nuclear plants, and so they don't always see our work in total. They'll see what we did on one plant or what we did on another plant, and it may not get reported in any of the news. California has been very receptive to our work. And there are many, many, many more environmental groups in a larger population that are able to talk about now the two remaining reactors at Diablo Canyon. We are looking at Diablo Canyon. We are looking at the seismic issues there because they're so similar to the seismic issues that happened in Japan. An earthquake on the California coast at the Hosgri Fault or the Shoreline Fault, or in the Cascadian subduction zone that connects into both of those, could decimate the plant at Diablo Canyon and subject everyone in a large portion of the state to significant radioactive releases. And yet the industry and the federal government and your own California head of public utilities control has fought to give benefits to the nuclear industry. Worldwide, we've had more than 11 million viewers of our work. And that's been really grounding for me as the founder of Fairwinds. I have people who write to us from all over the world. And followers come from almost every country on the planet. We have more than 11 million viewers of our work. And the foundations who help to support our work and the individual donors who support our work want it to be open source, and it is. We write under and produce our videos and information under a Creative Commons license so that anyone can share and share alike our material. And I think that speaks to the power of people wanting to know the truth. You and I have talked about the different people I've known, and one of my heroines is Dr. Helen Caldicott. And about 8 years ago, I finally got to meet her in person, and I've been able to work with her for a number of years. And she's taught me an awful lot. I learned about how tritium released from nuclear power plants around the globe, especially the Canadian plants or any of that design, crosses the placental barrier. The NRC still uses 10-year-old data that claims that it just is in the body for 50 days and pisses out like water. Well, it doesn't. There are real DNA changes. Background radiation has risen throughout the world. So we're all exposed to more radiation every day. And there are literally changes happening in our bodies that is changing the human race. I'm honored to know some of the scientists that are working on solar energy and wind energy and trying to change the paradigm so that we could shut these nuclear power plants down. I don't think that we should build any new ones. Arnie and I have both written reports and testified about how unsafe the new designs are. No little nuclear reactors. Bill Gates is promoting small modular reactors. You too can have one in your backyard. What kind of terrorist target is that? How about small modular renewables? Solar on every house. Energy efficiency, triple paned windows, insulation, and windmills. There's even a system that I've looked at and that's being used successfully that's solar and wind together. And they're small, non-invasive windmill. So when it's very windy, that operates. When it's very sunny, the solar panel operates. And then now we have really good battery storage that can carry that energy overnight. In Texas, for example, there is a utility system in Texas that's giving away the energy for free. If you operate your equipment after 9 p.m. until 6 a.m. in the morning, you can have it for free. Because they have so much wind power, they can't sell it. That's the future I want for my grandchild. That's the future I want for my kids.